background. A very warm welcome to you then. This is our applications Q&A session today for the Clore Fellowship, which is now open for applications for our 25-26 cohort. Before we get started, just a couple of points of housekeeping. So as you'll see, we're joined today by our BSL interpreters, Laura and Paul, and they're going to be interpreting today's session. If, as we go, you're a BSL user and you want to submit a question using British Sign Language, please do flag that in the chat, and then we will come to you to ask your question in sign language as and when we start to answer the questions. For those of you who are wishing to access captioning as well, we've got live captions running in stream text, and my colleague Shelley has pasted the link to that in the chat today. So the format of today's session, and just to add as well, we're recording today's session. So if you want to refer back to it afterwards, or if you're watching this after the event, welcome to you too as well. And the recording will be posted on our website probably tomorrow once we've got a chance to do a couple of edits. So it will be on the website on the Clore Leadership Fellowship pages. So the format of today's session is in a moment, I'm going to do a short presentation and walk through a bit of information about the fellowship itself, about how the applications process works, about eligibility, and also just some key headlines around the fellowship itself. After that, I will come to two of our Clore Fellow alumni. So we've got Andrew Wessel and Deanna Rogers with us today. And I will come to them to talk a little bit about their experiences on the fellowship and to share a little bit of the impact of the fellowship for them and share any tips that they might have for you as applicants. Some of you have submitted questions in advance, and I've got a list of those that I'm going to work through as I speak. But you're also invited, if you want, to put any questions into the chat. And at the end of the session, I will walk through the chat and endeavour to answer as many of those questions as I can possibly get to. We will finish the session promptly at 2, but if there are any questions that we don't manage to get to in the hour, then we will look at those after the event, and we'll post a document with the answers, the responses to those questions as well. So please don't worry if we don't get to your question. We will answer it in a document on the website afterwards as well. So I'm now got that nerve-wracking moment where I need to share my screen and hope that everything is working as it was a moment ago. So can I just check? Shelley, could you give me an audio cue? Is the presentation showing for everybody?
Yeah, that's fine.
Thank you very much. Okay, so today is a Q&A about the fellowship applications. Okay, and now it's not scrolling through. Tremendous. Here we go. So a little bit of information first about the Clore Fellowship. What is the fellowship? At Clore Leadership, it's our most longest standing programme. So we've been running it for circa 21 years now. And it's a framed programme of bespoke leadership development. And by that, I mean that it is a programme that has some key blocks, some key content that all fellows will encounter, will journey through. But also it's bespoke for fellows because there's a sense that that learning that each fellow undertakes can be taken in its own individual direction, depending on each fellow, depending on their aspirations and what it is that they're wanting to develop about their leadership. It's for a cohort of 24 fellows, circa 24 fellows each year. And you will be part of that 24 cohort. You will learn from and with each other as you journey through the fellowship. For the 25-26 year, it's running between September 2025 and May 2026. And within that, there are some key moments where you will come together as a group to learn and experience your leadership learning. But you will also be responsible for self-directing your learning as well taking forward elements of learning yourselves between that period. It's open to UK and to international leaders. So I'll speak later on about eligibility. But in terms of leaders in a Clore leadership context, we're really talking about change makers within arts and culture. So it's not necessarily around you being a leader of a team or working within an organizational structure. We do have fellows who are also freelancers, who are sole traders. So by leadership, it's really focusing around that topic of change making within your specific context rather than leading people. It can also refer to how you lead and work with people, but that's not an eligibility criteria. You don't have to be leading or line managing a team. We're looking for leaders who have around 7 years minimum experience, and that experience can come from multiple different places, types of work experience, voluntary experience, and it doesn't necessarily have to be a linear journey of experience. It can come from bits and bobs. There can be gaps. We appreciate that leaders may have career gaps for one reason or another. So it's 7 years in total, gathered from a range of different experiences. The only fellowship where the 7 years minimum doesn't apply is with our Accelerate Fellowship, which is for early career leaders, where we're looking for 5 years minimum experience. For the Clore Fellowship, we're looking for you to meet the general eligibility criteria, and I'll speak to those in a little while. You'll also notice when you make an application that there are some specific eligibility. I know I'm going to have problems saying that word today. Eligibility requirements for specific fellowships. And again, I will speak to those later. But they typically are to do with specific art form areas that you need to be working within. We are particularly keen to encourage applications from leaders from the global majority, and also deaf, disabled and neurodivergent leaders, which we know are underrepresented within cultural sector leadership. Okay, so looking, if I may, at the fellowship framework, the shape of the fellowship as a whole. The fellowship comprises 2 residentials. So we have a starting residential, which will take place in September 2025. And then the fellowship is bookended at the end by a second residential, which will happen in May 2026. Those 2 residentials are opportunities to come together with your fellow fellows, to learn from each other, to meet with each other. There's rich learning, and I would imagine Deanna and Andrew, our 2 fellow alumni, will speak to that later on. But there is rich learning to be gained from working alongside your fellow fellows. You'll come together for a midpoint series of workshops, and these are scheduled for January 2026. We also have an online assembly gathering with other fellows internationally, so fellows from all the different cohorts, which will meet in March 2026 online. You'll undertake, as part of your fellowship, a leadership profiling exercise. So that's a way of gathering information about you, your leadership, how you like to work, your areas of strength and areas for development. And that's part of the framework. You'll also undertake a 6-week secondment, and this will be within a host organisation. The idea behind the secondment is that you get to experience a different type of leadership than your usual day job. It's an opportunity to be embedded with an organisation, find out how they work, to live, breathe, see, sense, smell how they work as an organisation and what leadership means in that context. And it's an opportunity to try out a different leadership hat for a moment in time and take away the learning from that experience. You will also benefit from having an individual development budget of up to £4,000. And that is available to you to spend on activity that relates to your own individual learning. You'll remember I said that it's framed experience, the fellowship, but it's also bespoke. And that budget is an opportunity for you to allocate activities depending on who you are and what your leadership development needs are. And we're really flexible about how you're able to allocate that. It might be training, it might be opportunities for study visits to go and meet with, exchange ideas with other cultural sector leaders. Could be conferences, might be books. We're quite flexible in terms of how you're able to allocate that. You're also able to get focused support from either a mentor or a coach. So this is an opportunity for really tailored individual support for you. In terms of a mentor, it might be an established leader, more experienced than yourself, from which you can gain professional insights. In the case of a coach, it might be that you're looking for more personal development to support your leadership journey. And there's an allocation of funds to help you access either of those two ranges of support. We also offer, as part of the bursary package, fellowship package, a bursary, and that's £14,000. And that is available to either you, if you're self-employed or a sole trader, or to your employer if they are releasing you for the time necessary to undertake the fellowship. So that bursary is there to support some of the costs associated with you being released from your day job to be able to undertake the fellowship. And we have had some questions submitted around how the fellowship works for those who are in self-employment, who have a portfolio career perhaps, and I'll speak to that in a little while about how some of that flex is built in. You'll also, as part of your fellowship, undertake a provocation piece. And this is an opportunity to dive into an area of inquiry or research for yourself. There's some flexibility about how you approach that provocation. It might be a written article, could be a blog, could be a recording, a creative response. There's some flex within that. The piece does focus on an aspect of leadership learning, a question around leadership at the moment. And there are some examples on the Clore Leadership website if you wanted to take a look at those. You'll also undertake a collaborative inquiry with members of your cohort. So this is an opportunity to dive into a live leadership topic, something that's live within the sector at the moment, and to come at it from your different respective angles, and you'll prepare a response to that inquiry, which is shared at the final residential. And then in terms of access support, we will liaise with fellows, depending on access requirements, to look at any access support that you may need to support you in undertaking your fellowship. So it might be around some support, it might be around some additional budget to access, for instance, sign language interpretation, or it can also include things like childcare provision. We do offer a childcare bursary of up to £1,000 to support additional childcare costs that you might have when you're undertaking your fellowship. So we would have a discussion with fellows about what that support might look like, and support you in putting provisions in place to undertake that. Okay. So for each round of applications, we offer a different selection of fellowships which you're able to apply for. And each round, the fellowships that we have on offer, they're really determined by the funding that we have within a given year. So there is some variety, there are some changes year on year, but it is dependent on the funding that we're in receipt of at that particular time. When you're making your application, you can apply for up to 2 fellowships. You don't have to apply for 2, but you can apply for up to 2. I would really strongly emphasize that when you're looking at which you may apply to, carefully check the eligibility. If you've got one where you strongly fit the eligibility, brilliant. If the second is a little bit more wobbly, I would suggest that you just stick to the one. The competition for places on the fellowship is extremely fierce. So if it's a little bit in doubt whether you meet the eligibility, I would strongly just go for the strongest one that you're able to. But if you meet the eligibility, you can apply for up to 2. So this year's fellowships, we have a cultural learning fellowship. So this is for those working in learning, outreach, participation of any kind. The role within that can be of any kind. You can be working directly with participants, and those participants can be of any age. It could be early years provision, it might be working with elders. You might be more involved in a producing role or an administrative role, project management role, a directorial role within cultural learning. Any of those roles are eligible for that fellowship. We have a culture and climate fellowship this year. And so that is for a fellow whose role is primarily working in issues of around climate. Again, that can be any type of role, but really it's got to be the focus of your work, or a major focus of your work. If just one element of your role is responsibility for exploring issues around climate emergency, I would say just look at the eligibility. It does need to be the main focus of your role. We have got the Duffield Fellowship, which is for leaders who are currently or aspiring to work in medium to large scale organisations, so those really large institutions. The Accelerate Fellowship, which I've already spoken briefly about, is for fellows who are earlier on in their career, up to 35 years and with 5 years, minimum of 5 years experience. We also have specialist art form fellowships this year in dance, in visual arts, and in the theatre sectors. You do need to look at the eligibility and whether if you're working across different range of art forms, these fellowships, the main focus of them is in those individual art form areas. So that's the main prioritisation in terms of eligibility. We also this year have a National Trust Fellowship, which is for an employee of the National Trust. The Transform Fellowship, that is for applicants from the global majority or who are deaf and or deaf, disabled or neurodivergent leaders. And then finally, we have a self or employer funded fellowship. And this is one where you or your employer would provide the funding to support that fellowship. So that you would be providing the finances for that. Important to say with that fellowship, that applicants who are self or employer funded go through exactly the same application process as everybody else. Okay. So in terms of general eligibility criteria for the fellowship, we are looking for a minimum of 7 years in a leadership role. As I've said before, leadership looks like many different things. You might be an artist, you might be a creative practitioner, you might be working as a sole trader in a consultancy type role. You might also be working in an organisation, be it big, small. In terms of leadership, we are really interested in is you as a change maker in your context. The only exception to the 7 years requirement is, as I've said before, the Accelerate Fellowships, which is 5 years plus. We're looking for leaders who've got an ambition to lead and want to make impact through their work or practice. So it's really about considering where you're working now and how you can take that impact to its next level. That might be around progressing your career. It might be around taking a more strategic approach to your work. It might be around scaling or diversifying your practice. It's really, though, about making an impact. We're looking for individuals who are committed to and passionate for and really understanding of the cultural sector and its broader context. So we're looking for you to understand where you sit within that cultural sector and to be committed to working within the cultural sector. We're looking for those who have leadership potential. So we're looking to see how that leadership, that change making is able to grow. Are you understanding of how you can progress to your next steps? What might those next steps look like? Really important to say that a key focus of your activity as a fellow is around self-reflection, self-understanding, self-awareness and learning about self. So we're really looking for applicants who are curious about that, who are hungry to learn more about who they are as leaders and the world around them. We're also looking for those who are able to influence practice or policy and affect change. So that's really speaking to that potential for impact. Does where your leadership is placed now, is there potential to expand that? It might be you as a practicing artist, are you able to affect change through your practice? Or it might be your organisation, are you able to connect strategically as a leader and affect change in that way? And just to add, as I've spoken already, that in addition to these general eligibility criteria, there are additional criteria for some of the specialist fellowships. So please do read the criteria really, really carefully. And as I've said, if it's looking a bit wobbly, you're sort of trying to crowbar yourself into the eligibility of a fellowship, I would say, given how competitive it is, it's probably not the right thing to do to apply for that wobbly one. Okay, so in terms of how to apply, making your application, you register for an account on our online portal. So that's on the website. It's relatively simple to do that. You just put your name and some contact details in. Before you get going, though, you really do need to read and digest our guide for applicants. In that, you'll find the details of the eligibility criteria. You will also find details of the questions as well. So if you want to work offline on your application and kind of work through it, get input from others as well, you can take that guide and use those questions as your reference point. The application process for the fellowship has 3 stages. Stage 1 is a written application where you're asked to provide a CV and answer some questions about you and your leadership. You can, if you want, submit a recorded response to the questions. It does prompt you in the application form to flick a toggle, and then you're able to upload a video or a audio submission or a BSL recording, depending on what your preference is. We do ask that you anonymise your CV. That's so that we can assess the applications anonymously. So please redact any identifying name, email addresses as you upload your CV. Stage 1 closing date is the 6th of February. Then we will assess your application. We have a pool of external assessors who will review it. And then for stage 2, we will ask for those candidates who are shortlisted through to stage 2. You are asked again another series of questions about you and your leadership. And at stage 2, you are also asked to provide details of a nominator. And the nominator is somebody who is able to speak to your leadership potential, who knows you and your work really, really well, who can speak about the impact that having a fellowship may bring for you and for the sector more widely. The nominator needs to be somebody who really knows you and your work well. It does not necessarily need to be somebody really famous or a swanky job title. We are looking for somebody to speak about you as a leader, and we're looking to understand more about you and your leadership from what they say about you in their nomination for you. For those completing stage 2, the submission date for that is the 27th of March. Important to say that the application guide does include the questions for stage 1 and stage 2. So if you want to have a look at those questions, prior to opening of stage 2, you're welcome to do so. If you want to work through those questions, if you're unsuccessful following stage 1, you're also welcome to do so. We hope that in designing the questions, they are a useful exercise in self-reflection and reflecting on your leadership. Following review of the second stage applications then, if you're invited for interview, that's stage 3, we'll be holding interviews online between mid-April and the end of May. Decisions will come in mid to late June, depending on sign-off from our funders and kind of review of the allocations. And then the fellowship for 25-26 starts in September. As I said before, you can apply in alternative formats on the portal. You just flick the toggle. That's absolutely fine. There are some recording lengths that we do ask you to stick to, please. And if you want information about the application process, we do have it available in alternative formats. There is a British Sign Language version on our website, and we've got large print and things like that available on request. Some top tips. Really, really, really important that you read the guide for applicants, which includes the questions, but also some top tips on what we're looking for from those questions. If you are shortlisted for stage 2, please do choose your nominator carefully and in good time. The deadline for stage 2 applications does include that nominator as well. And sadly, if we don't receive the nomination, but we have your application, we need both elements to consider your application. And as I said before, we're interested in what the nominator has to say about you rather than them being a big name or a swanky role. We would really strongly encourage you to be brave and honest about who you are and what leadership and change making means for you. We're not looking for fully polished, the finished product. We're looking for people who are really open to learning about themselves and have an understanding of where they're at the moment and where they might go to in the future with their leadership. We're more than delighted to hear what you're interested in learning about yourself. Where are your areas for growth or development? What's challenging for you? Leadership learning is about learning about what works well, where you're at, leading through failures, leading through success. So we're really not averse to hearing about where some of your gnarlier bits of leadership are at the moment and what that means for you in your longer term journey. And lastly, just to say, we're really keen that you write as yourself or you submit a recording as yourself. So we're not looking for funding speak, funding application speak, or polished prose. If you want to submit your application in bullet points, that's fine. We're not looking, as I say, for a polished narrative. We're more interested in what you have to say rather than the prose of how you say it. Some key information. So stage 1 deadline is noon on the 6th of February. I'm afraid we're not able to accept late applications, so it's really critical you get that in on time. If you're shortlisted, our stage 2 deadline is noon on the 27th of March. And you should receive a notification of if you've been shortlisted for interviews around about the middle of April. Excuse me. Interviews will take place online in April and May 2025. And for candidates who are shortlisted for interview, you'll receive the interview questions in advance. You'll receive, obviously, details of the schedule and who is on your interview panel as well. So we send that to you in advance. We can, if you've got any access requirements for an interview, we will ask about that when your interview email comes out, so we can support in terms of access as well. Outcome to interviews, we should be communicating round about middle to the end of June, say the end of June for safety, once we have sign off for allocations from funders. And as I've said, we can provide information in alternative formats. And if you're sort of umming and ahhing, what might I apply for? Should I apply for that? Will I be eligible? And you feel like it would be useful to have a little bit of additional support, you're able to drop us an email and we can help via email. Or if you feel like you need a bit of a call to tease through a few questions, then that's something that we can also do. As I've said a couple of times, questions for both stages are in the application guide. And it is with regret that we're not able to provide individual feedback for stage 1 or 2. In an average applications round, we receive around about 200 applications. So it's a high volume. It's really, really competitive scheme. So it is with regret that we can't offer feedback at stage 1 or 2. We do provide feedback for those who reach the interview stage. Oh, there we go. So I'm going to now turn to our two fellow alumni, Andrew and Deanna, who've joined us today. And thank you both so much to see your lovely faces. So lovely to see your faces. And thank you so much for joining us. Just to speak briefly about your fellowship experience and anything really the impact for you or any top tips that you would share. Deanna, you're first on the screen, so I'll come to you first if that's all right.
Hey, Kate. Hello, everyone. So it's really I'm feel really honored to like speak here because I remember be watching one of these videos and feeling like both daunted and kind of like invigorated by it. And so audio description. So I'm a mixed heritage woman. I've got my long black hair tied back into a ponytail with gold hoop earrings on and a bright yellow jumper. And behind me are books and mason jars full of stuff on a bookcase. So I'm a freelancer, I'm a poet, and I'd heard about the Clore Fellowship for many, many years and been told you should do this, this would be really cool for you to do, and kind of never felt that I was ready or had enough behind me or enough clout to do it. And I guess I'm really glad that I did wait for that amount of time because I feel like in the application process I was really able to lean into what I wanted to change and what I thought was important for this sector and for this world. And so it made writing that application easier or not easier but more enjoyable because I felt very clear on what my impact would be and it was really exciting for me to be able to write about that because I'm definitely one of those people that see applications as a way of figuring out ideas, and so even if I don't get them they're not wasted because I've been able to articulate a new idea. So definitely view this process like that, so it feels like your creative practice is being um interrogated and you're able to kind of give yourself more answers that you can take into all aspects of your career beyond this incredible opportunity. So I had an idea about creative facilitation and its impact on the world, and was able to really write into that and see it through and have a very clear vision of who I wanted to speak to and um, what experience I wanted to have. And at first, I wasn't sure whether the application was calling for that, but I realized that it is. I guess the team want you to be very steady and clear as to where you are right now, and then you go into the fellowship the fellowship journey, and then it all gets pulled apart and interrogated and spun around. And that was my journey, which was quite uncomfortable, I guess. As a freelancer, I like knowing as much as possible, as many certainties as possible, because the nature of the work is uncertain. And so being in the Clore Fellowship experience, as someone who was like very like, this is what I'm gonna do, and tried to kind of keep it linear, and giving over to the provocations and the stimulus and the conversations, and really stripping back loads of layers meant that I really pivoted and actually spent the time interrogating my creative practice and who I am as an artist, and where that kind of fuel of leadership is, especially specifically from becoming a mother. And so I I guess this is to say be very clear on what you want to do with this fellowship, and all the places that it can take you to, and have that real like blue sky but researched kind of application. And then if you're successful, be prepared to learn so many new things about who you are as a person and what your driving force truly is, and how you can really show up in a sustainable, authentic, inclusive way, and inclusive for other people, but also inclusive for all the aspects of yourself, which I think this future of leadership is calling for. Um, yeah, I don't want to take up too much time, but enjoy the application process, enjoy writing and rewriting it, or just really enjoy being able to spend time really interrogating where you want to be and what you want to do in the world. And that then no time is wasted in that.
That's really sound advice. Thank you, Deanna. Thank you. That's really, really helpful. Andrew, can I turn to you now as well?
Yes,
Anything
absolutely.
you'd like to share?
Hello, everyone. I am a white man with facial hair, with no head on his top of his head, with a ugly, struggling shrub behind me, trying to make it through winter, and I'm wearing a kind of mustard orange jumper. And I really loved what Deanne was saying about the application process, and I applied on Clore in a bit of a whim. It was always kind of in my horizon, but I guess there was something in my gut that I saw the opportunity and applied a couple of days before it was due. But the application process for me was that moment to really reflect on what drove me, the change and the stories that I wanted to tell, and that determination to make a difference, I guess. I work very much in the creative engagement kind of space, and really wanted to use the application process as a moment of reflection. And really, it became the template for what I followed through um, in the fellowship. And for me, it was like, this is who I am. This is how I'm going to show up. You'll either want me or you won't. And that was kind of how I approached the application process. But it became I guess, a bit of the map about what I wanted from the fellowship. For me, I wanted space and time. I've always been in environments, I think a lot of us would understand this, where you're running from one thing to the next, where it's just like next project, next project, next thing. And there wasn't that time that I was really craving for like reflection, for digging a little bit deeper, for understanding what it was that I wanted to do in the future, how I wanted to shape the future. For other people, the fellowship meant really different things. And I think that's what I really loved about the cohort. For some people, it was the opportunity to read, to travel, to network. And sometimes I was like, oh, people are doing so much. I'm not doing as much because was shaping it in a really different way. And I think that's one of the things that was really beautiful about the fellowship and the opportunity is that it's not molding you into this predetermined version of what the fellowship should be, but like really understanding your own voice, amplifying that voice, understanding what you wanted to refine, and being surrounded by other people, I guess, that actively believed in your potential, and were kind of working alongside themselves and each other to realize that potential. And I think that cohort, that everybody I was with, has become a really, really strong foundation. There'll be friends in there that will carry on forever. And I think the different aspects of the fellowship have different resonance to different people. So some things like other people leaned into really strongly, and for others it wasn't um, where the change or the power was. For me, the coach and mentor aspect was really, really strong and really, really powerful. I did my secondment at Tate Liverpool in a space that I would never kind of consider a natural habitat. And again, that was incredibly eye-opening. Um, and the residential, spending time with people. What I would say um, is that you need space and you need to be able to create the space for the fellowship to be of value. And I think that would be my one set of advice to everyone is, create that space, because if you can't and you can't really kind of commit to it, I don't know whether you'd get everything from it that's possible. Yeah, I think that's kind of like in 2 minutes, like an overview, but I'm really happy to answer any questions, or if people want to reach out outside of this as well, happy to pick anything up.
Thank you. That's a really kind offer. Thank you. Brilliant. Thank you so much, Deanna and Andrew. If you're happy to stay around, there may be questions that might ping in the chat. If not, thank you ever so much for sharing your insights. I'm now going to move to answer questions in the chat. We also had some questions submitted in advance as well. So as I say, I'm going to get to as many of these as I can. And if we can't, we'll answer them on a Word document, which we'll put on the website afterwards. So a couple that were submitted beforehand. We had some questions relating to family commitments and caregiving, and how it's possible to kind of juggle that. There are some things that we put in place to support those who might have children or maybe caring for other members of their family. As I said, there is a £1,000 bursary towards childcare or caring support. And we ask you to give us this for additional childcare that you need to undertake the fellowship. And we'll ask you about how, what the budget is for that and what you're likely to need. Some other kinds of things that we've done to support those with caring responsibilities. We have had those who've got particularly small children who may need to attend residentials. We've had them stay with another family member. So we've had a larger room or a family room, things like that. We do offer some costs towards the childcare costs, additional childcare costs whilst you're on residential as well. And we'll just kind of, when we're having a development plan meeting, just think about what some of those kind of, some of the flex that you might need to think about within your scheduling as well. So there are some support that we can put in place. We had a question around whether you need to do a Clore leadership course first to then go on and do a fellowship. We do have some fellows who take that route. If you have done a Clore course before, I would really strongly recommend that you give enough time to really use the juice from your course first before you apply for a fellowship. So really reflect on the learning that you've took away first. We also have some fellows who haven't done a course with us. It might be the first time that they've engaged with Clore's work. So either is fine, but if you have done a course, please make sure that you've kind of used all of that learning and you feel at the right stage to then apply for a fellowship. We had a question relating to international applicants. We do have international fellows, but those applicants are, the application process is delivered in partnership with some partners that we work with. So the Chevening Secretariat and a partnership that we have in Hong Kong. That is because we have the relevant visa mechanisms put in place with those partners to enable those international fellows to come and undertake their fellowship and spend a period of time within the UK. So those are the mechanisms through which international applicants need to apply. And there are some restrictions because of those funders' eligibility about which country you can apply from. We had a couple of questions relating to employment status, changes of employment status midway through and things like that. We take applicants from self-employment, but also those who may be employed on PAYE. It's not uncommon for fellows to change employment statuses between putting an application in and starting their fellowship, or even midway through the fellowship. Sometimes we've had people move from PAYE into self-employment. That's not a problem. We would have a conversation around where your bursary payment needs to be it to yourself as a freelancer or to your organisation. The only change which would be challenging is if you're working in dance at the moment, you apply for the dance fellowship and then you completely 360 and you go and work in classical music, and there's a fundamental change. If you're putting yourself forward for the dance fellowship and you then not end up working in dance, that would be problematic. But employment statuses, things like that, that's not problematic. Also, question around what constitutes experience, what can you wrap into that 7 years? We're really flexible about what that constitutes. We understand that employment can look like different things. It might include self-employment, employment within an organisation, some voluntary work, if you're on a board or you volunteer. Absolutely fine to wrap that within the 7 years. And as I said earlier, it doesn't have to be consecutive. We appreciate that leadership journeys can be really distinct, different, a bit wonky. There may be time out, time in. That's all fine. We had a question from somebody specifically in Scotland who was asking about eligibility. This year, we don't have a Creative Scotland funded fellowship. As I said at the beginning, which types of fellowship we're able to offer is dependent on the funding that we're in receipt of in a given year. However, there are some fellowship categories within which Scottish applicants, put my teeth in, can apply. So please do check the criteria really, really carefully. I know it's the different categories change year on year, but that's within the parameters of our own funding, so slightly beyond our control. Okay, I'm going to move to questions in the chat because I'm really mindful of time. So we had a question from Rob, who has asked, is the secondment with a host organisation something Clore allocates or something that the fellows identify themselves? Bit of both is the truth. We have a long list of opportunities from host organisations, big and small, all around the country, offering different types of opportunities that we put to the fellows when they're looking at their secondment choices. We do sometimes also have fellows who've got a really clear idea about where they would like to be placed, and they will self-initiate that. It does need to be something that is different to your day job, though. You cannot be asking for a secondment that is very, very similar. That's not the gig. It's about stepping into a different type of leadership opportunity. Kat has asked, is the host organisation pre-chosen? No. As I said, we will look at what a fellow is interested in terms of the opportunities. There's a juggling act with the cohort. Sometimes we'll get multiple requests for the same secondment, but it's not predefined who's going where. Jolassi has asked, I had the same question, and if a placement internationally was possible. I would caution, because there is a finite budget for your development plan, but international placements can be possible. We have had fellows who've self-initiated schemes abroad, but just caution that you have that £4,000, so you need to kind of make sure you can make that go as far as possible. Georgina has asked, I turned 35 at the end of July. Does that count, or do you need to be under 35 for the whole course duration? You need to be 35 or under at the point that you start your fellowship. So by the sounds of it, it looks like you're fine in terms of the dates that you mentioned. Joe has asked whether film and TV comes under visual arts. Film and TV in the kind of classic sense, I would say no, but there are some elements of performance art, if it is primarily visual arts, where there can be. We would need to seek a bit of guidance in terms of your practice, I think, if you're an artist and you're working in that area, from the funder, from AN, who fund that fellowship. Does theatre include opera? Oh, that's a toughie. That is a toughie. Claire, I think that might be one where we need to come back to you and make a note about that one. Sarah has asked, should you already know what your provocation piece exploration is? Absolutely not, no. I mean, we do have some fellows who come in with a really clear, that's what I want to do, I'm going to do that. For others, it may emerge, bubble up through what they're learning. I see Andrew and Diana nodding. It can just emerge as an area of exploration for you as you go through your fellowship. So no, we're not asking you for that at the application stage. Are there any stats about how many places, how many applicants there are for different fellows? That's been asked by Georgina. Georgina, that I think is another one where we will have to come back with a kind of how many apply year on year for each of the different categories, because it does fluctuate. Yona's asked, are the fellowships only for UK-based professionals? I'm working in Europe in the field of cultural policy, and I'm trying to figure out if I'm eligible for a fellowship. I would think, Yona, with regret, that I think that possibly does rule you out from an eligibility perspective. There are criteria about where you need to be based, and our international fellowships at the moment are, as I said, through the Chevening and the Hong Kong scheme. So with regret, unless you were applying for a self-funded fellowship or an employer-funded, I think that would rule you out of the categories that we have on offer this year. Leanne, segueing on quite nicely, Leanne has asked about the employer-funded fellowship. Is there an overall cost? This is going to challenge my memory. Shelley, if you've got the guide open, could you tell me or paste in the chat for me? I think it's around about £22,500 plus VAT. So it's quite a chunky investment for an employer or yourself if you are able to seek funding to make. Josh has asked, what if you work in an arts and culture role for a private company, not in the cultural sector? I mean, there's a couple of ways of kind of interpreting that question, Josh, so I might need to follow up with you separately. In terms of like the funding sources for your organisation or your practice, be it that you're funded, by public funding or trusts or foundations, that's fine. If you're a commercial enterprise, that's also fine. We're not averse to having fellows who are working within commercial operations. So if that's the thrust of your question, there is flex, because the cultural sector and creative industries wraps around lots of different kind of modes of funding. If it's more about you're not working, maybe come back to us, Josh, if I haven't answered your question there. Leah is asking, how big is the shortlist? It's not, Leah, it's not like we've got a defined number for stage 2. We will put forward the candidates that we feel are, we want to put forward that meet the criteria and that are the caliber that we want to put forward. But as an indicative, last year we had 230 for stage 1, and we put forward, I think it was just over 130 for stage 2. And we had, I think it was around about 70 odd for interviews as well. Claire is asking, if applying for more than one fellowship, do we need to make 2 separate applications? No. The application form asks you which fellowships are you applying for, and then it asks you how do you meet the eligibility criteria for those 2. So if you want to apply for 1, just fill in 1. If you want to apply for 2, fill in them both, but you do need to speak to the criteria for all of the ones you're applying for. Please don't try and sneak in 3. We have seen that, or more. We can only consider you for 2, and you're kind of stretching yourself too thin. Please focus on the ones where you really meet the eligibility. Alicia, I think, is said, thank you for this informative session. Where can I find the info for the different fellowships? They are all listed on our fellowships applications page. There is a section that talks about funded fellowships, and that gives you all the details and the eligibility for this year's fellowships. What is the time commitment asked for the nominator? From memory, they are asked a set of 5 questions, each with circa 200 words or equivalent of sort of 2 to 3 minutes recording for the nomination. So it depends how quickly your nominator is able to craft a response. That's a slightly how long's a piece of string question, I'm afraid. So I'm going to give you a bit of a vague answer, Catherine. But bear in mind, you don't need to approach your nominator unless you reach stage 2. So just to say that. When do you get the outcome answer on stage 1 to know if you're submitting for stage 2? I've actually seen another question pertaining to when you hear about stage 2. So Shelley, in the background, would you mind pasting the answer to that in the chat? That would be brilliant. Approximately what percentage of applicants are shortlisted? Leonie, that's a difficult one for me to answer, but last year we had 230 stage 1, 130 stage 2, 70 for interview. So that gives you an indicative kind of amount. Oliver asks, should the nominator be specifically not your employer? No, it doesn't have to be your employer, but it can be your employer. It needs to be somebody who knows you and your work. So that might be, if you're an artist, it could be someone who you've worked with as a collaborator even. It might be somebody who's commissioned you. If you're working within a team, it might be your line manager, a member of your board, or somebody that you've I would say it shouldn't really be your partner, your wife, your husband, your partner. That might be a little bit difficult, might be a conflict of interest, but somebody who knows you, your work, your practice, your leadership well. What if you applied last year and were not successful? Should you just put the same application in? That's Laura asking that. Laura, I would encourage you to reflect on where you are as a leader now. I mean, there may not have been much change in circumstance, but who are you? Where is your leadership learning about you at the moment? Where are you in your leadership journey? So I would say you might want to use that as a starting point, but do some work to reflect on where you're at now. Will there be an option to send documentation of previous work, such as exhibition installations, community workshops? NS has submitted that. There isn't, but within your CV, your anonymized CV, please do include, major pieces of work that you're particularly proud of or you want to particularly draw our attention to that illustrates the range of your experience. But no, we don't ask you to submit recordings of artistic work. We're not looking at your artistic practice or your track record of your work in terms of its outputs. We're interested in you as a leader. Georgina, is there anywhere that states the full additional criteria for the individual fellowships? Yes, it's on the website in the funded fellowship section. So the web page should give you all you need there. Kanchan has asked, in India, it shows your partner is achieving Clore Fellowship. However, while checking the website, the application is closed. I saw the Clore Fellowship open just a few days ago, so I was wondering. Yes, the timeline for international applications and UK applications are different because of the process. So there are different timelines, I'm afraid. Okay, we've got 1 minute left. Maeve, how many fellows are in each year? How many fellow places are there? It's round about circa 24. It depends on the number of funded spots that we have, and also if we have applicants from self-funded, employer-funded who may be successful. So it's around about 24 each year. Rihanna, if I believe I'm the most eligible for the Accelerate, is there any point looking at the other fellowships at all, or are all the rest for 7 years plus? Rihanna, if you meet the criteria for others, they will be for 7 years plus. You do need to have that 7 years plus. So if you're by any way, if it's looking a bit wobbly in any way, shape, or form, I would not apply for that, the wobbly fellowship. Go for the one where you firmly, squarely meet the eligibility criteria. It's not going to, there's no impact on how your application is assessed. Yeah, but we will be looking for you to meet the eligibility criteria really, really strongly. Okay, we are at time. It's 2 o'clock. I can see Shelley waving at me. Josh and others who I might not have got to in the chat, your questions, we will answer them alongside the ones that we've answered today on the website. We will upload that alongside the recording. So please, if I haven't got to you, apologies. But thank you very much for coming along, for asking really interesting, engaging questions. Thank you so much to Deanna and Andrew for sharing your experiences. Thank you, Shelley, for driving the tech behind the scenes. Please do read the eligibility criteria, the applications guide, and look forward to receiving lots of applications from you. Go well for the rest of your day. And yeah, look forward to receiving your application. Thanks ever so much.